Hello and welcome to this RSM webinar in connection with the outcomes of our Board Assurance Framework survey that we did in the housing sector. I'm just going to focus today on just the top tips that emerged. So those areas where we feel as RSM, given the self-assessment that was undertaken, where we feel that you could make further improvements with regards to your board assurance arrangements. So I'm not going to go through all of the findings or the survey information that we got. Focus on the stuff that's of interest. So why did we undertake the survey? Well, the concept and idea of a board assurance framework has been in place within the housing sector for quite a while now, and we indeed issued a publication a few years back to help organisations in the housing sector develop the board assurance framework. So we want to find out how organisations were getting on. Generally, our experience has been that it's being embraced and being used pretty well. So a board assurance framework, what does that largely do? You know, it focuses on the key control environment, the main risks, making sure that all of those elements are being well managed, but it gives a total complete picture and visibility. So it's not done in a fragmented way. And it's done in an ongoing way, which is really important because that's part of course, a board's governance mechanism is to make sure that the control environment is effective and that key and major risks are being managed. So we're demonstrating that and fulfilling on that. And it becomes a main agenda item, of course, for a board. So we want to know how organisations are getting on. Could we improve on it? Could you improve on it? So we're going to give you some top tips, of course. I'm also at the end going to talk about perhaps your next steps, which may be looking for some further information that we could provide, or perhaps engaging further with us in connection with what we're saying in this survey. To remind you of the licence to operate model, for any of those that have attended the NHF Audit Committee conference, you'll know I've made mention of this a number of times. These are the key components of your risk and governance compliance framework in my mind, and I think all organisations need to make sure that these are in place and effective. And of course, our survey and the board assurance framework focused heavily on some elements in this model. I'm not going to expand any further. I'm going to give you a chance to take a look at that slide, maybe to take in what it's saying and reflect on that. If you do want to talk to me about licence to operate model and how it can be used and applied in your organisation, do come and speak to me, make contact with me. My details will be at the end. So I'm going to get on with the survey findings now regards the board assurance framework. Okay, board assurance frameworks, we found that many of you have them in place. There's no doubt about that, a very high percentage. But one of the areas that was interesting that we found was that a lower level, and when I say lower, we're not talking really low, you know, let's remember, housing does this pretty well, to be honest. But there was an issue that seemed to exist around how much of the board assurance framework was explicitly aligned and referenced with your core business objectives. And we have to remember the board assurance framework is there to give you confidence that your objectives will be achieved through risk management and making sure that the control environment that you've set in place is effective. So if it's not aligned with your core objectives, then potentially you might be missing a trick, you might be focusing on the wrong area, and indeed you might be making some wrong decisions. So that leads into an area also that we found that was quite low with regards to level of positive responses was an independent review of the board assurance framework. We did find that many of you were reviewing your assurance framework and maybe doing through some kind of self-assessment, but very few were undertaking an independent review of the board assurance framework to understand that actually it was really doing what it was meant to do. So worth thinking about, you know, is there stuff you could learn from other organisations? So maybe think about talking to your internal auditors about this and perhaps building this into your audit planning process. Or indeed commission some kind of external review if you're so inclined. But independent doesn't have to be necessary every year, but do think about undertaking it. We asked about sponsorship in the survey, and we were trying to determine who took responsibility for the board assurance framework, and it would seem very natural that it is the board, and indeed the responses we got suggested that was the case. But one of the things we did find was that we found through the survey, we gave a number of options, and actually we found there was high percentages of other parts of the organisation who were supposedly the sponsors of the board assurance framework. In this instance, I haven't got a particular major issue, but I am saying maybe make sure that the board ownership, particularly with the board, is built into terms of reference and make sure that's explicit. The survey focused also on the way in which you were gathering assurances and the type of assurance that you might be using. And we identified a couple of things really here. The assurance evidence that was being supplied was not always necessarily being considered for its relevance and reliability or being tested. It was often accepted. And what I mean by that was there was probably very little further challenge around the assurance that was being provided. And the other thing we identified in this was that actually there was still room for improvement in identifying and making use of what we refer to as the 3 lines of assurance. And I'm going to provide a specific slide on this just to expand. So when you're looking for assurance and obtaining assurance, it tends to come through, in our experience, 3 different sources. The first line tends to be management involved in the activity or the function on which you're receiving assurance, i.e. those actively involved in the operation of a control or the application of a control. Then there's a second line within the organisation, which is potentially a department that may not be directly involved in the activity but may actually be making sure that certain things are being done. And that could be, for example, the finance team looking at the way in which financial management is being done by a service manager. You know what I mean, insofar as the finance team will come along and provide challenge. That is a second line challenge to the person responsible for the budget. And then third line, of course, is an independent assurance, which traditionally usually is independent audit, or it could be a specifically commissioned review. Now, if you think about that, you actually can build up quite a big level of confidence with regards to the type of assurance that you might be provided. If you don't know where that assurance is coming from, you might find that actually all you're relying on is first line assurance. I have no problem with first line assurance. I think it's really good and it's there and it's available. But traditionally, it's not always viewed as the most reliable that can be out there, whereas independent is often trusted as the more reliable, if that makes sense. However, independent assurance is often more expensive. So all I'm saying here is think about the way in which you identify your assurances and maybe categorize that assurance and work out whether you're getting the right proportionate level of assurance from the right source to give you enough confidence that the control is working. Doesn't mean you need first, second, third line assurance in each case. You might say, in this case, for a control, I'm happy with first line assurance. But in a control which is really critical, you might say, actually, we're more inclined to reach all the way through to third line assurance. So 69% of management that participated in the survey and 63% of audit committee suggested that their BAF did identify the 3 lines of assurance. And that's still quite high, but you are saying roughly, they're 37% have not identified the 3 lines of assurance. So I just suggest that you might want to explore that a little bit further and make sure that your BAF is reflecting those to give you a deeper understanding of the type of assurance you're getting and the reliability that you can place on it. So separate to BAF sponsorship, this is about BAF monitoring. This is actually those involved in looking at the BAF, making sense of it and determining whether it's actually giving the organisation the assurance that they want and the confidence that the risks and controls are being effectively managed. Again, we got a number of responses there. In my mind, and practically, you tend to find that it's the Audit and Risk Committee or equivalent that has this on its agenda, and it should be a key part of indeed the Audit and Risk Committee agenda. So what I'm saying here is make sure it's built into the terms of reference, and make sure that it actually sits firmly in your agenda and is a standing item to drive the discussion that is going on around risk and assurance at your Audit and Risk Committee. If it's not, I think you need to reflect on that. It should be a core business tool that they're using and relying on. And it also makes sure that everything then is aligned to core business objectives and make sure that all your resources, assurance resources, are being suitably deployed. Which leads me neatly on to a further tip that we've got here that came out of the survey findings was that in many cases, what we were getting from the self-assessment, from the survey, was that we were saying that there was actually a misalignment between internal audit resources and assurance resources that was what's within the BAF. I think the BAF should drive everything. It should drive where your internal audit is focused. There's no doubt about that. So I would make sure that your internal audit plan is fully aligned with your board assurance framework so it flows through. I'd also suggest that you might want to make use of some explicit accountability statements, as we've called them, which is the ways and means by which management, the first line of assurance, report on the way that controls are being deployed within their service area. And I've seen this being used quite effectively now in all sectors, so that's not-for-profit and corporate. And what we're starting to see is annually and maybe every 6 months, there is a cycle of positive reporting or formal reporting on the state of internal control by managers responsible. And it covers usually a number of dimensions, but they have to give some kind of explicit assurance as to whether things have gone on or not. This is not a identify problems and berate people for not doing certain things. This is just an open and honest way of assessing how well the control environment works. And if things aren't working as well as they should, then it's about putting improvement plans in place to make sure they can do. But it's a good tool. Where I've actively used it, I found there's been good levels of engagement and organisations get a lot from it. So again, if you want some specific information around accountability statements, do get in touch with me and I can provide you with some further information. In fact, we've got a really good case study on the website, and I'll come back to that. Okay, and finally, making sure that the board assurance framework, if it is based around your core objectives, if it is focused on your key risks, if it is capturing the key controls and it's using all the lines of assurance, you should be basing your statement of internal control on it. It should be a natural byproduct. In fact, in those organisations using the BAF to drive their audit and risk agenda, what they tend to do is also build up their statement of internal control as the year goes by. So come the end, it's not something that's done as an additional exercise. They know what it's going to come to when they reach the end of the year. They know what the conclusion is going to be. They know what they're going to report. So think about how the statement of internal control is being used to be produced from your existing board assurance framework. And really, perhaps one of the final elements here is, and quite positively, 81% of both the exec management and audit committee that participated in the survey suggested that if you removed the BAF, they'd be less confident that risk and control was being managed effectively. So that demonstrates to me, or proves to me, that actually the value of a board assurance framework. So for those of you who do not have a board assurance framework, then think about how you might want to introduce one. And again, those that do have board assurance frameworks, we want to maintain that confidence. So just reflect on some of the top tips I provided in this webinar. And like I say, housing is, familiar with risk, it's familiar with control, it's familiar with those management arrangements. So some of the things I'm identifying here are not things that are going to set the world alight. They're more refinements to your current arrangements. But just think about what you're doing with them and how you can perhaps use what we're saying here to enhance the way in which you get that assurance and make it effective. However, one thing that is quite interesting, our survey asked whether you, as a housing provider, were making use of technology to manage your board assurance framework and indeed your wider governance, risk and compliance arrangements. And what we found is that actually 66% of housing providers still do not use a software solution to manage those arrangements. Instead, they're still reliant on Excel spreadsheets for this purpose, and in the worst case scenarios, maybe even Word documents. This is a digital age. We should be making use of management information systems that are out there and designed for this purpose. We should not be spending time trying to cobble, dare I say, things together through spreadsheets. We should be enabling our managers to interact with our governance, risk and compliance arrangements, take responsibility, take ownership, identify issues, report on issues, and we should be able to extract the information we want and take that to the board in an easy manner, in a real-time manner, to be honest. Therefore, enabling much more succinct and effective reporting, but also improving accountability through use of these systems. I've identified, of course, there the RSM, Governance Risk Compliance Digital Solution, which is called Insight for GRC. There's the web address there. Please do take a look at it. It's made up of a number of component parts. We're already active in the housing sector. The products are well established and well used, and we have great clients giving us great feedback on them. Do have a look. That's what Insight for GRC looks like, just so you can get a feel for it. I think it's something that's quite attractive, more than a spreadsheet, as you would probably guess. So do go and have a look. So leads on to really next steps, to be honest. I've picked out a few top tips. Some of them, as you say, you may be familiar with, and you might say, well, okay, that's not going to take us much further. But I think that just minor tweaks and refinements will improve your processes quite significantly. So reflect on what I've said. Be honest with yourselves. Is there things in there that you could be doing differently to improve your board assurance framework? If you want to discuss this further with me outside this webinar, yeah, give me a call by all means, or contact me. I'm always happy to discuss board assurance framework, what it means, how you can improve. And I work across all sectors, which gives me the ability to see what's happening elsewhere and to bring that knowledge to the likes of you. Insight for GRC, I'll just mention the website once more, www.insightforgrc.com. Please go there, do take a look at it. And of course, please do, come to the RSM website and see what else we've got that we've produced in connection with the housing sector. We're always putting publications out. Now, one thing I did mention was actually the use of assurance statements or accountability statements for management. If you go onto the RSM website, or if you contact me, I can send you a fully worked up case study that we did with a group of police forces, okay, where they developed an assurance framework which they deployed across their collaborations they were involved in. The same approach can be used within a single entity. So do have a look at that case study. Do come and talk to me about that. I think there's a lot of value in assurance statements and accountability statements when they're used effectively. So that's it really from me today. If you've got any questions or you've got any observations, please do get in touch. Always interested to have that chat. All my contact details are there. But look forward to hearing from you. Hope you found this very useful. I'm sure there'll be some items in there that your board will want to discuss and perhaps take forward. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.